So as I was saying, the 11th Amendment does not redefine sovereignty. All that it does is it just prevents the courts from discussing cases that involve this sort of subject matter. But the important distinctions here, there are several, and the consequences of those distinctions, going back to England, with the differences in the various powers of law and equity. The powers in equity were handled by the Chancery and the Exchequer. So what you had essentially was you had a competition between the papal power and the power of the lord of the land. So I suppose that you could say that the idea of divine right monarchy does come from the idea that the Pope is some sort of version of Jesus Christ or something. You know, like in Judaism, and I guess in Christianity, I'm not an expert in this regard. There is this idea that there is a God that is sovereign. You know, so how that affects monarchy and how that affects all these things that we're talking about, I have no idea. But it's one of the reasons why there is a separation between religious institutions and the idea that authority somehow comes from God, as opposed to the Enlightenment ideas, which is how the United States Constitution was brought about and how it's written, which is from the authority of people rather than some sort of divine authority or divine right. And it's the same in terms of the rights of states. The rights of states are extrapolated from the rights of individuals. And the rights of individuals are, of course, natural rights. The whole thing is a matter of self-preservation. For instance, you have to have a right to water, otherwise if you don't, you die. And if you die, then what is the point of it all? So when you have a government that is brought about by the authority of the individual sovereign, collectively assembled together, you have the ability to create laws and rules that are fashioned after the idea of natural law. And all the law systems that we have, for instance, the states, the United States, the laws of the United States separately is the common law of England. I can't remember the exact provision in the New York State Constitution, but it expressly states that. And as far as I know, every constitution in every state says that except for Louisiana. Which brings me to this idea that with England having as the source of sovereignty, or the idea of sovereignty in the lord of a land, the English law appertains essentially to two things. It appertains to the rights of things, property rights, and the rights of individuals. The rights of individuals being the lords expressing a power, a check and power balance over the monarch. You had early on with the Magna Carta, the knights with the swords at King John's neck and all of this sort of thing, you know, which came about to be the House of Lords. It was a form of check against the monarchy. So you had this system of checks and balances that evolved, which is not the same as the separation of powers. That's something altogether, it's something altogether different. But one of the important distinctions here is that with the rise of capitalism, there was no provisions in English law, in the common law, that appertain to commercial rights or trading rights. However, there was a system of laws as such in Judaic law and also in the civil law. So that the commercial rights, the commercial law as it arose, which was also a very new thing. Capitalism was, I guess they marked the beginning with the Charter of the Bank of England, 1692, I think it was. The commercial law arising as a function of that came about around the time that Blackstone's commentaries were published, which was, I think, around 1750. You know, so all of this stuff was rather new within the time frame when the U.S. Constitution was written, when it was originated. So, and the various ideas involved. For instance, the person that's mostly attributable with the rise of commercial law in England, incorporating the civil law into the law of England, was a person by the name of Lord Mansfield. So if you look at the history in the United States, these conservatives are fond of speaking of the founding fathers and all this. You see that for the most part, they were all, they all accepted as a basic premise the idea of the common law being the laws, the law that, you know, governed the various states. But there were also people that, such as the Federalist Party, that were also in favor of commercial law, that were in favor of the ideas of capitalism and so on and so forth, which, like I said, was looked at that time as something new. It was a new beginning. It was an escape from feudalism, an escape from the ideas and the laws that originated under the landed gentry, which is something that conservatives wanted to preserve. They wanted to conserve that, you know. So you had these people that related to the landed gentry, the laws of the land, like in the U.S. Constitution, the law of the land. So there's always been a sort of controversy, but you'll also notice that there are provisions in the Constitution that expressly address commerce, which is something that's different from the way that the decisions were and the way that the various provisions and laws were created in England. All of this was a new thing that was all evolving all around the same time. There was like maybe a difference of 40 or 50 years between the time that these things arose in England and other places in the world and the time that the Constitution was actually drafted, put together, enacted, and put into effect.